Joining us now to discuss the summit from Beijing is Sitao, the chief economist of the financial consulting group Deloitte China. In the studio, Shihoko Goto is the senior associate of the Asia program at the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars. From Sydney.Kerry Brown is director of the Chinese Studies Center at the University of Sydney, and also here in Washington, D.C., Christian Miere, senior fellow with the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Mr. Zhu, let me start with you. As we said earlier, some of the biggest economies in the world will be at this summit. What would the host country, China, be looking for?
I think what China is looking for is to send a message to ensure there will be more collaboration between major economies, because China is the largest trading country in the world, and China has been benefiting more from free trade arrangement. But at the same time, China doesn't want to be left out by due to certain initiatives. And of course, it's very important for China to utilize this platform to reinforce that message.
Shihoko, President Obama will be there at the summit. What are American hopes for this meeting?
It's to send a message that the United States is engaged in Asia, that the U.S. rebalance to Asia is in fact a reality, that there are economic interests that the United States needs to protect, and that there are rules and regulations that actually need to be fleshed out amongst the member countries.
Okay, Kerry, Australia, one of the big economies at the summit. What are Australian expectations?
Well, I think this is a preparation for when Xi Jinping, the president, comes to Australia in a couple of weeks' time, and for the G20. So it's a bit of a test run for that, and I think the main business will be done then. I mean, it's also kind of important because now the Republicans are in complete control in the US and have said that they will work with the president. Maybe they're going to edge a bit closer to actually doing this TPP. It's very complicated, but as a sort of massive free trade zone, that will be something obviously China has a big opinion on, and will probably try and think of its own concept for having a sort of Asian free trade zone that could be a counterbalance to it, as it's not actually part of the TPP thinking at the moment.
Christian, no European countries at the summit, of course, but the EU will obviously be looking very closely at developments at the summit. What would the European countries be looking for?
Well, as you said, the EU is an observer and not a participant to APEC, and really doesn't have an ability to intervene or interfere with anything that happens there. But as fundamentally a trading bloc, the EU is very keen to see what happens with both TPP and any regional trading issues that occur at APEC, whether it's a regional free trade zone or trading bloc in some form, or even bilateral discussions between countries such as China and South Korea on free trade agreements.
Right, TPP being the
Trans-Pacific Partnership. US-led free trade agreement between various countries. But I also think that the Europeans are keen to understand more China's role within the region, and I would suggest that APEC is part of a sinicization to some extent of the regional order within Asia, with China launching various initiatives such as the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and expanding the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to ensure a more central role for China at the heart of Asian geopolitics as well as economics.
Mr. Zhu, China putting its stamp on Asian economies there. How has China's status within APEC changed in the last 20 years or so?
Well, 20 years ago, Chinese economy was just getting out of recession. China barely had any foreign reserves. Today, China has got $4 trillion reserves and is the second largest economy. China's ambition is not to be stuck in middle income trap, to become a genuinely affluent society. So, I mean, really huge changes in the past 20 years. But at the same time, China does feel shall we say, isolated or cornered by certain U.S. initiatives. So, so China does want to start new kitchens if the existing framework doesn't fit China's growth strategy.
You want to respond to that, Shihoko? China feeling isolated and cornered in some respects?
I think certainly there is a paradigm shift in Asia insofar as China is now the top dog in the region. With that are certain expectations from the international community. And at APEC, China is really trying to rise to the occasion. But one of the big stumbling blocks that China faces at the moment is its relationship, not just with the United States, but also with Japan. Japan used to take on that role that China currently has as the economic top power. The two countries are not speaking to each other at the moment, essentially. There are hopes that at the APEC summit, there would be a summit meeting between Xi Jinping and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. This appears to not be happening. We still don't know. The Japanese Foreign Ministry is really pushing for it. But I believe this is an opportunity for China to really embrace its role that goes beyond national interest and talk about taking on a leadership role and embrace all the countries of the Asia-Pacific region.
All right, Kerry, there may not be a meeting between the Chinese leader and the Japanese leader, but there will be a meeting between President Obama and President Xi. What are Australia's hope out of that meeting?
Well, I mean, Australia is the biggest its biggest trading partner is China, and that must be true of many of the people going to APEC, and its biggest security partner is China, and that's probably true of many of the people going to APEC. So that's a very, very common kind of dichotomy. But I think Xi Jinping, it's going to be interesting because this is the first time sort of Obama has been, meeting Xi Jinping for a while, and also, this sense that America, China thinks that Obama is a weak leader, and the elections that have just happened kind of almost prove that. I wonder what sort of sense we'll get of Chinese attitudes at the moment towards American leadership, and how they're going to play with an American leader who you could interpret is really going to have a tough 2 years, almost like a lame duck, kind of president. It'll be interesting to see if there's a sort of imperious, maybe a kind of quite a, confident manner from Xi Jinping towards him, because at the moment, I mean, President Xi is in a much more powerful political domestic situation, and maybe even geopolitically much more powerful.
Christian, as we said, the European Union, not a member of APEC, but all its members trade with all the members of APEC. How important is APEC to the economies of Europe?
Well, very much so. I mean, the European Union as a whole is not doing particularly well economically at the moment, the Eurozone in particular. But China is a key aspect of European Union trade, and in fact is very important for China's trade as well. So for that reason, developments in economics and geopolitics in Asia is key to the Europeans. It's slightly frustrating for the various European governments that they are increasingly reliant on trade with Asia for their own economic well-being, but they have very little political influence within the region. I mean, it varies from country to country. Some countries, such as the UK, have long-lasting former colonial ties with various countries there, or stronger security and political links to other nations. But as a bloc, the EU has a very weak voice in the politics and security of Asia.
Kerry, I want to look at one other aspect of the Australian relationship with the United States. It's seen as a key component of the Western Defence Alliance. It shares intelligence with the United States under that special Five Eyes agreement. Are we going to see Australia make its voice heard at the summit on such issues as Ukraine, say, or the offensive against ISIL?
Well, certainly on Ukraine, I guess Mr. Abbott, because of the very tragic, shooting down of the Malaysian Airlines jet, I mean, there is an obvious reason why he would need to say something about this. But I think, Australia is always in a very difficult position when it meets together, when China and America are in the room, because it, in a sense, has to stay with its closest ally, and that's America. So even with the establishment recently of this development bank in China, well, Australia couldn't be part of it, although in many economic ways that makes a big, lot of sense, because it's such an important economic ally of Australia, China. So I don't think it'll be solved at this meeting. APEC isn't the right place for Australia to solve these kinds of problems. But when we get Xi Jinping coming to Australia for the G20 later, a kind of week or so's time, then we'll probably get much more idea of really what Australia means to China and what China means to Australia. At the moment, it's not always very clear.
Okay, we have to take a break right now, but there's much more to come in our conversation on the ongoing APEC summit. Stay tuned, you're watching The Heat.